You're listening to Olivia's Book Club, an Arizona's Family Originals podcast.
Hey, everybody, and welcome to Olivia's Book Club. And I am still your host, Olivia Shapiro. Very, very excited against all mechanical and tech odds to be speaking with an author who I just truly, truly admire, who's profoundly gifted, and so excited to be speaking with Dani Shapiro, who is a talented writer, a podcast host, and your latest work of fiction. It had been many, many years in the making. It had been more than a dozen years, I believe, since you had published a novel. The book is Signal Fires, and it is just a work that will stick with you and touch every single emotion in your body and mind and spirit. So I'm just thrilled to be able to have experienced the book and to be able to talk to you about it. As well, I'm holding on to one of my favorite reads ever. This is your memoir, Inheritance, that I felt was one of the kinds of books that can change your life and change the way that you look at everything you're doing. So Dani, thank you so much for speaking with me.
Oh, thank you, Olivia. It's great to be with you.
I was so moved by Signal Fires, and I don't want to not do your book justice I don't want to do any sum up of it, because it is the kind of story that is hard to give the little sum up elevator pitch for. So tell me what it was about this story first that made you realize, okay, I need to write another novel, and give the explanation as you beautifully can.
It was really the characters. These characters appeared for me, really all of them. And I think of them as a constellation of characters. There are 7 main characters. I mean, some are more in the foreground and some are a little bit more in the background. But they appeared to me, and their intersections and their connections with each other, some of which they all live in the same neighborhood. They live on the same street, Division Street, in this fictional town called Avalon, which is a suburb of New York City, but could really be anywhere, a suburb of any city. And their lives glance, and sometimes more than that, up against each other in ways that are mysterious and profound and life-altering for some of them. And I was thinking a lot as a writer and as a mom and as a, just a human being about what it's like to move into a neighborhood and decide that this is where you're going to live out a chunk of your life. Or if you have kids, this is where you're going to raise your family, and your kids are going to grow up with the other kids in this neighborhood. And you may not have a lot in common with the people who are next door or across the street or down the street, but in some way you've kind of thrown your lot in life with these folks. And I really wanted to explore that.
It is a sort of reminder or commentary about just the when you think about a neighborhood, and I live in one of those neighborhoods where, every house looks the same kind of, when people go in and it's just the humanity, the complexity, the highs, the lows, the almost silent, unobserved tragedies, the heartbreak, the hope. All of this is playing out in everybody's home, all the way down the street at any given time. And people are experiencing maybe their most lonely moments, or their most meaningful moments, or their greatest sense of loss. And we just don't see each other. And then when these intersections happen and these touches, the impact is so profound, and the trickle effect of these moments when some of people come into each other's lives is really, it was just so gripping and moving to me. And we've got multiple timelines going on, but all at the heart of this neighborhood. Would you speak a little bit about how you came up with the concept of the tree that's at the part of the neighborhood?
Yeah, no, if you had told me years ago that I would write a novel in which a tree would really be kind of a main character, I don't think I would have believed it. But something, something happens at this tree. Something tragic happens many years before the main action of the novel really kind of begins. It moves. I mean, the novel moves around in time. It's not chronological, but this event happens at this majestic ancient oak tree that is on Division Street. And one of the things I thought about a lot is when something profound happens in a particular place, and then time passes, does the air still somehow shimmer with whatever it is that had happened, whether it's something beautiful, miraculous, or tragic? And in this case, well, I think I can say this because the novel opens with a car accident, and these kids have been out sort of joyriding in their mom's car. 3 kids, a brother and a sister, and one of their friends, and there is a tragic accident, and it absolutely is these kids' fault. And yet there are no consequences. There are no consequences for a whole variety of reasons. It's 1985. They are a white family. They're privileged. The father's a doctor. They're stalwart members of a community, so no one's breathalyzed, no one's really questioned, and they never speak of it again. And it's not like they sit down and have a discussion about how they'll never speak of it again. It's a tacit, like self-protective, terrified, shame-filled feeling of just, we're never going to talk about this again. And if we never talk about it again, maybe it'll go away. And of course, we all know that the things that you never talk about again because you hope they'll go away definitely do not go away. They grow and they fester and they sort of bloom in the corners. And so years go by, and one of the things that I really began with was that I realized that the neighborhood kids, the kids whose families moved into the neighborhood later, maybe a decade later or more than a decade later, they all refer to that tree as the magic tree. And the reason why they refer to the tree as the magic tree is because the tree has been sort of decorated and festooned with lights, and it's a memorial. I mean, that's how it begins, the same way as we see crosses on highways or, places where people have passed, being made into a kind of shrine or have special meaning. The tree was that for this family, but that family has moved on. And now the neighborhood kids just experience it as magical. And I thought that there was something really profound about that. And I wanted to explore, well, is it magical? Is there a way in which somehow it's all still shimmering in the air? And it plays into all of the lives of the characters at various junctures in the novel.
Well, and the way that we also revise our own histories, and the way that if we keep something a secret, it shapes us, and then it takes a different shape, and it has its own life, and it becomes its own thing. And I mean, it's almost like, over generations, how, just where almost even where like a fairy tale would come from or something. There's some core of reality, and then everything shifts. And it was such a beautiful story, and it made me think so much as a mother about, what we think about as being a good parent is doing anything we could for our children, and what kind of damage we will ultimately do to them as human beings, or we're at risk of, because of our instincts to fix.
Yes. Or the idea of not speaking of something or protecting your kids in the name of love. And there's a lot of love that becomes a little misguided in Signal Fires. There's, in the Wilf family, one of the families that's central to the book, there is this father's instinct to protect his children and a mother's instinct to protect her children, and the ways in which that then just shuts down the whole story, and how it impacts on those kids as they grow up and as they carry this unspoken burden with them. And then across the street, there's another family who eventually move into the neighborhood, the Shankmans. And in the case of the Shankmans, I mean, my favorite character, if I'm allowed to have favorite characters, is the Shankman's son, whose name is Waldo. Yeah. And he is this extremely brilliant, special, unusual boy. And his father doesn't want him to be brilliant or special or unusual. He wants him to be normal.
Basic.
He wants him to be like everybody else because, you know, in the father's estimation, the road to success and the road to adult, like getting by, I won't even say happiness or contentment, just getting by, is being like everybody else. He wants his kid to be in the outfield of the Little League game, actually trying to catch the ball and not just staring up at the sky or staring down at the grass. And he doesn't know what to do with his kid. And that's coming out of love for his kid, but it expresses itself as anger, rejection. And he's kind of a tragic character, the father, because he knows he's doing it. He has enough self-knowledge to know that he really ought to go buy an anger management book on his way home from the office, but he doesn't do it. And he keeps on struggling with his own instincts, and he messes up the one thing in life that if you mess up, you can't fix it later, which is he knows that he wasn't a good dad to his kid. And yet his son thrives because his son is he's like a weed, growing up, in between the cracks of a sidewalk. He's going to find the sun. He's going to find the light.
There are just moments with Waldo where, your heart just breaks because, you're just reminded of all of the vulnerability that comes with childhood. And you're so reliant on these adults to understand you and to see you and to make you feel like you're okay exactly the way you are. And you remember those moments of internalizing, when you're letting people down, or when you're not being as their expectations, would want to see, and the little failures, and it is heartbreaking. It's such a powerful story. And what element did you begin with? I cannot even imagine how one approaches telling a tale like this. And was it Waldo? Was it the tree? Was it the wreck? What was it that? And how long also had this been kind of simmering in your mind and soul?
Well, as you mentioned, it's my first work of fiction in a very long time, and I started it a long time ago. I started it after my memoir Devotion came out. I began as a fiction writer, and then I took this detour into writing memoir. I shouldn't call it a detour. It's a whole body of work, but I began to write memoir. I didn't know why. It wasn't a decision. It wasn't, I didn't decide that was a good idea. It's just where my imagination and my creativity and my creative drive took me. But I began Signal Fires. It didn't have a title. What it had were these characters. I began with what ends up being the first real chapter of the book, which is one night in 2010, and this older doctor, Ben Wilf, looking out his window. It's the last night that he's ever going to live in this home that he's lived in for, 50 years. And Waldo is 11 years old, and he's looking out the window of his home, and he is obsessed with the stars and the cosmos. And he and Dr. Wilf end up meeting that night, and it sets off a chain of events that then unfold over the course of the whole novel. But I had that. I had them. I had the magic tree. Waldo calls to Ben across the street and says, "I'll meet you at the magic tree." I myself, as the novelist, did not yet know what had happened at the tree. I knew something tragic had happened. I knew it involved the Wilf family, but I didn't know exactly what it was. And as I proceeded writing, this is now more than a dozen years ago, I had this idea that I wanted to tell this story backward in time. I was very committed to this idea. I was completely married to it. I was going to tell the story backward in time, but it was a totally flawed idea, because then when I got to the next section of the book, which takes place in 1999, Waldo is born. And then if I keep on moving backward in time, now I've lost my favorite character. I've jumped the shark. It's just completely not. So
It's literally, where's Waldo?
Where's Waldo? Yeah. And I put it in a drawer, and it was very sad because I knew the work was good. I thought it was probably some of the best writing I had ever done. I loved the characters. I really knew them. But I think what happened is I wasn't ready for them. And this is one of the most interesting things that's ever happened in my writing life, is that, so it's all of these years later, I wrote several books in the interim. It culminated, that period of time, in my writing my memoir, Inheritance, which came on as a result of discovering this family secret that was this huge, profound thing that really made me think a lot about what we know and what we don't know about people. It made me think a lot about why someone can feel important to us and not know why. You know, that feeling we all have had. It's such a human feeling of like meeting someone at a party or passing someone on the street and just thinking, I know you. I've never seen you before, but somehow I know you. That feeling became very powerful in me. And then Inheritance came out, and it became a bit of a sensation. And I was on the road for it for a long time. And right at the point where I was still on the road for it, the pandemic began. And one day early in the pandemic, I was cleaning out my office closet, literally that closet that's right there. I was Marie Kondoing it. You know, I was like tired of baking sourdough bread. And I started cleaning out my office closet, and there was this pile of pages that I had not, if they weren't haunting me, I truly did not think I would ever go back to them. I just thought that's the one that got away. And something just whispered in my ear, read this, reread this, sit down and reread this. And I did. And my mind sort of exploded, because what I realized was, now it's 2020. And I have written this chunk of this book that takes place on one night of 2010. And this chunk of the book that takes place on one night, which is New Year's Eve of 1999. So the Y2K New Year's Eve. So essentially the year 2000. So 10 years apart. And now it's 10 years hence. And who would these people have become? Who would Waldo, my beloved Waldo, who was 11 years old in 2010, he'd probably be in college. What would he be doing? Who would he have become? Where would he be? What would he have done in the early days of COVID? His father, what would have happened to him? His mother, where would she be? Dr. Wilf from across the street, would he still be living? And if he is, where would he be? Where would he be riding out the pandemic? And then Dr. Wilf has a son and a daughter. They're the ones who caused the accident all those years before. And the son grows up to be a chef, and he has a restaurant in Brooklyn. What would a chef with a small restaurant in Brooklyn be doing in the early days of the pandemic? So, you know, I think writers, so many of my writer friends during the pandemic, as I did too, really struggled with writing in the face of this, you know, the enormity of what was happening in our world. I ended up feeling like I had these characters in this material that were not going to be a pandemic novel. I had absolutely no interest in writing a pandemic novel. You know, we were in it. You know, we were in it. I didn't want to write about what I was in. I didn't, but it gave me the opportunity to have these glimpses that I found so satisfying as I went back to work on Signal Fires. Just almost like a window shade went up, and we could take a look at, you know, I mean, it was heartbreaking to see Waldo as an 11-year-old, but not so much if you know who he becomes at 21. And we even get glimpses, tiny glimpses into who he becomes as an adult later in his life. So we know he's going to be more than okay. So that allows us, in a way, as parents, it's the kind of thing, that you say to your kids when they're in middle school, which is, it's going to be okay. You're not peaking now. This is not the best. Trust me. I mean, I recently did a live event in Miami, and there was an audience of a couple hundred people, and I asked for a show of hands, and I just said, how many of you, given the opportunity, would go back to middle school? And nobody raised their hands. But we get to experience that heartbreak, but knowing with the comfort of knowing that it's going to be okay.
Yeah. I wonder, it feels like, say, if Signal Fires is, it's a delicious soup or sauce that is just so complex and so rich and delicious and full of everything. It couldn't have been made without this, stock for the broth or whatever that had to be. And maybe it was just because this was the only book I had read of yours prior to this, that I just felt so much of this experience through the course of the evolution of these characters.
Yes. I mean, to extend your stew metaphor, it's like, those, like when you like tie up some herbs and it infuses everything in a stew.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
I think that's what Inheritance and living through that experience and writing that book brought to returning to Signal Fires, because the questions had deepened for me. And, I had always written, really always, about family secrets in all of my books. I didn't know why. I could give you a series of reasons I could have of, I thought that there were some secrets and there were things I didn't know about my parents, but it wasn't until discovering, and it was in 2016 that I made this discovery that, in fact, I was the secret in my family, that I was the secret. My dad wasn't my biological father. My parents knew that and didn't tell me. And, I won't get into the story because anyone can read Inheritance and find that out. But it was as if I had been haunted by something all my life, and I had been digging and digging as a writer to either in fiction or in memoir what it was that didn't quite add up. And then I did discover it quite by accident, and it led to my writing Inheritance, which ended up feeling like it was the end of a certain body of work for me. Like I was done digging. I was done with that search. I've written 5 memoirs. They all could be published in a boxed set. They all sort of belong to each other in some way or another. The first one that I wrote, I was in my early 30s. And then in writing Inheritance, I was in my 50s. And that's the boxed set of, we only can know what we know in our lives when we know it. And when you are a writer who writes multiple books, especially multiple memoirs, you can only know what you know then. And so in a way, I had written through those decades, and then I became, as a writer and as a person, someone who could actually take this story in Signal Fires and really allow it to fully flower. Yeah. I couldn't have done it sooner. Even if I had figured out the structure 15 years ago, I'm glad I didn't. It was painful, but I'm glad I didn't, because I wasn't ready. I didn't have the life experience that I ended up having.
Because the themes of what you're exploring through Inheritance, it's just sort of asking that question that I think in some base level, we all wonder. It's like, who am I really? What defines me? Where do I fit in the world and in my family and in all of it? And I think for me in particular, it resonated so strongly and stirred up so much for me because I'm an adoptive mother. So, these themes of biology and the power of biology and of seeing yourself and of that, innate connection and of knowing and of the innate knowing of mother to son, and what does that mean in the context of my life and my relationship with my son as a mother, even though, I was the first face he saw when, one of his little eyes opened. We was like Popeye for a couple of days, but there is still always that intangible that you wonder so much about, what deep within his core and soul is stirring or longing, or, and it was very, very a lot.
I'm very moved by that, because, I really think, even the title Signal Fires, I so deeply believe in soul connections, and it's a great irony to me, and a lesson that my dad, who raised me, who was not my biological father, is the parent with whom I had the profound soul connection, still do. I mean, he died when I was 23, but I still, every time I talk about him, I literally feel chills running up and down my body. I feel his presence. I just do. It's happening to me right now as I talk to you. I always do. And my mom, who is my biological mother, I never felt that with. Go figure. And the man who's my biological father, and this is one really interesting detail, and I'll briefly say to your listeners, just so it doesn't sound like completely misleading, what I discovered was that my parents had trouble conceiving me back in the 1960s, and had used a sperm donor, and were told, as people were always told in those days, never tell anyone, don't tell a soul, what you don't know won't hurt you. Don't tell your own parents, don't tell your siblings, never tell the child will never know. So in a way, it's a really intense version of sweeping things under the rug, and really thinking like that they could be kept there forever. And when I started Signal Fires, I didn't have any of this information, right? I didn't know anything about this. I never entertained the thought that my dad wasn't my biological father. And I created the character of Dr. Benjamin Wilf. He was fully formed. 100 pages of that book were written, and Benjamin Wilf was Benjamin Wilf. When I returned to it with all of everything that I know, and I resumed writing it, I continued to write the character of Benjamin Wilf. When I finished, and I had met my biological father, several years earlier. When I finished Signal Fires, I gave the manuscript to my son, who is one of my early readers. He's in his early 20s. And he came into my office after he finished it. And he said, "My God, Mom, it's him." Benjamin Wilf, looks like my biological father, talks like my biological father, has the same medical specialty as my biological father, has a kind of constitution and manner. It was like he was already in me somewhere. And I conjured him people who have read Inheritance, who read Signal Fires, probably think that I created that character having already discovered and met my biological father, and that is not the case. So the kind of, what you're describing, in adoption, they call it, in the literature, they call it genealogical bewilderment. But the difference with adopted kids is that they always know their story. Today they do. Well, not all of them, but most of them.
They should. They should. Yeah.
As should people who have been conceived with donors. But adoptive parents and literature and adoptees are way further into that journey and of understanding that. But our identities are formed by the stories that were told from the time that we are sentient beings. And so if the story that we're told is an adopted story, or we had help in your coming into the world, then that's part of their identity. And it's not simple, but it's known, right? Mm-hmm. And if it's kept secret, then it becomes like your identity is being formed around something that isn't true, around something that's missing. And that was true for me as a kid and growing up. So that feeling I had of something doesn't add up, it was because it didn't, because it just simply didn't. I wasn't like my family members, physically or in terms of character, but I didn't know why. And so I'm very moved by what you're saying, because that feeling, I think, when Inheritance first came out, adoptive parents often came to my events. And if they hadn't read the book yet, some of them thought that what I was saying was that biology is paramount. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that. I just think that it's something, you know, nature is something, and we'd like to dismiss it completely because because we want to believe that nurture is everything. But, see somebody with more than one kid and you realize, more than one biological kid, and you realize same family, same parents, same biology, same environment, completely different human beings, because nature is nature. So it's fascinating, and it's stuff that I was forced to really think about in a way that I embraced, because I thought, my God, I am a writer. I'm the author of 9 books. I have been digging into the subject of identity for my entire adult life. And it turns out that it is the subject of my entire adult life.
It's incredible. And you must have, obviously I know it was an instant bestseller and it was a huge book. I would imagine a lot of people found it also, or a new audience, during the pandemic, because I felt like this was when people were really, because we were so bored, doing DNA testing kits like crazy. And I know personally, I had a friend who found a brother and they had no idea, and so it was, immediately I'm like, you need to read this book. It was, all of these moments were happening in people's lives in this, so it must have hit or struck with a lot of people in another way.
That's so interesting about the pandemic. I hadn't thought about it that way. Every year before the holidays, the DNA testing companies lower their prices. And it has become one of the very most popular holiday gifts in America, with families giving it to each other. And then a couple of months later, people discover all sorts of things, all sorts of things. And I would say, Inheritance came out in January of 2019. So that's 4 years ago, right? And here we are in January of 2023, 2023. Yeah, 4 years. And the stories that I hear anecdotally are just increasing. I can hardly talk to anyone who doesn't have 1 degree of separation from someone who has had some kind of discovery because of having done a DNA test. And the stories there are a million different kinds of them. But yeah, and it's estimated that, the 35 million DNA tests have been sold in this country. That number is probably higher now. Mm-hmm. And around 2% of those 35 million people discover specifically what's known as a not parent expected event. So, and that's not, a brother that you didn't know about, or a sister you didn't know about, or a child you didn't know about. This is a very specific thing, and that's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people. And eventually it will end, because people will realize that they can't keep those kinds of secrets, which to my mind is a very good thing. And when people would say to me, what should I tell my kids? I had so many parents who had never told their kids coming to my events or contacting me and saying, I don't know what to do. My daughter's 30 years old and she doesn't know. My son is 40 years old and he doesn't know. And I tried to come up with something that I could say to them that would be both non-judgmental and true. And all I would say is, they're going to find out. And then, and then it's up to them. They're going to find out, do you want to still be around for that? Do you want to be alive for that? Do you want to be present for that? Because they are going to find out. And I'm an example of someone whose parents were both gone once I found out. And I would have preferred to have been able to have a conversation.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it's amazing sometimes when you think about the changes in our lives over just a couple of decades. When going from a space where realistically you would believe that could be a secret that could be kept for generations until everybody has passed. I mean, and then for technology to so rapidly change, and now we know, well, nothing is a secret, and there is no such thing anymore. And I think too, in the context of your biological father, what his expectation was at that time, based upon the science and what they were doing, and then now the overwhelming feeling that you did explore in the book, and I know you explored in your relationship, of like, whoa, well, how do I hit the brakes on this freight train that is going to be coming my way now that this is accessible information so easily that we never would have thought.
Yes, a huge reckoning that's happened and that's continuing to happen. And it's an ethical dilemma. It's a bioethical dilemma. It's a moral human dilemma. What's the right thing to do? Nobody asked for this. The donors who donated, who were often medical students or graduate students who were doing it usually to just make a little money, and they absolutely were guaranteed anonymity and privacy, and there was no reason to ever think it would be otherwise. And then all the people who were born as a result of donation, both egg donation and sperm donation, who didn't ask to be born that way. So the contract wasn't with them. The contract wasn't with me. The contract was with the institute where I was conceived. I suppose the contract in a way was with my parents, but the contract wasn't with me. And so that becomes this really, really interesting question is, what do we owe each other? What do, that I explore that in inheritance, like what did I owe him? What did he owe me? And it becomes really complicated because you have some situations. We have a really beautiful, miraculous story, and I'm so grateful for it. But I have encountered people who have had doors slammed in their faces. I've also encountered people who discover that they're one of, 50 or 60 half siblings, because sperm donors often donated over a long period of time, or once sperm began to be frozen, you could have siblings, half siblings, who were generations apart with this. I mean, the science never planned for any of this, and yet here it is. And I think the thing for me that I'm most troubled by is the idea that in terms of the places that are responsible for, sperm donation, egg donation, and even the DNA testing, need to be at the forefront of accepting and allowing to sort of move forward the conversation, not turn it into, oh, you're going to do a DNA test and some fun facts. Maybe you'll find out that you're related to Queen Victoria, or that you're 1/100th, whatever. I mean, it's so much more than that for so many people.
Yeah, there are not that many fun facts that are going to come out. I mean, northern Spain versus southern. I mean,
no, it's true,
right?
And people, the thing that people often say to me, sort of laughing and sort of sheepishly, is, "Yep, I came out exactly as 99.9% Scottish, just like I thought I would," or whatever, which is what I thought I would do when I took a DNA test. I mean, I wasn't looking for anything. I just did it because my husband was doing it. And I came back with like half of my ethnicity making absolutely no sense given my parents. And that was, of course, the beginning of that journey.
May I ask how your relationship is now with your biological father?
Yeah, I'm not talking about it much because I want us to have a relationship that's not I mean, it's enough that I contacted him, that he became open to meeting me.
And then I wrote a bestseller.
I wrote a best-selling book, and I was on the Today Show talking about it. And he probably
had
had
profile like that.
You know, I mean, yeah, I think it's a way in which we can have a private relationship, because I will talk about anything that's in that book, but anything that has happened in the years since then is ours.
Yeah, I can understand that. Back to Signal Fires. You're adapting this for television, so you are taking the lead and doing the screenwriting, right? So what can we expect from this as a series?
Well, it's early days. I mean, it was optioned, and it's being developed by some really wonderful producers, and they gave me a shot at writing the pilot, which is something that's happening more in television these days, where writers are becoming involved in their own projects. It used to be many years ago that if producers said to a novelist, "Yeah, take a crack at it," they weren't that serious. Now they really do. I think there's a lot more respect there, and more of an understanding that maybe the novelist will be more intimate with the story than anybody else. What I would say is that, the way that the novel deals with time and the different periods of time in which the story is being told, I'm very much hoping that the series will do that as well, where we have different nights and different days in different decades, all playing out in a kind of multiverse-ish kind of way, which I find really satisfying as a way of telling a story.
It's just an incredibly beautiful book, and I cannot recommend it strongly enough. It really, it's that rare book where you really are completely in the lives and the hearts of all of your characters. And so it was just so beautifully done. It was a great pleasure to be able to speak with you, and I really admire your work so much. And I'm extra excited that I'll be seeing you in person in Arizona this spring when you're here for the Brandeis big alumni book event. So that will be wonderful.
I'm excited about that. It'll be nice to meet you in person.
Yes. Apologies for all my tech troubles at the start when we were trying to get going here. It's Dani Shapiro. The latest book, the novel, is Signal Fires. If you have not read it yet, get it. And also, by the way, you did your own audio narration, and you are gorgeous at it. So what can't you do?
Thank you. I think the podcast probably helped me a lot with learning something about how to do that. I think it also is what allowed my publisher to take a chance on my narrating it. It was fun.
They were excellent. Thank you so much, Dani. We'll see you in the spring. Appreciate it.
See you, Olivia. Thanks.
Thanks for listening to Olivia's Book Club, the podcast. I'm your host, Olivia Fierro. Our producer is Margaret Stewart. You can send us an email with your thoughts or your book recommendations. Olivia's Book Club at azfamily.com is the address. And you can check out Olivia's Book Club on Facebook or find us on Instagram. Hello, Bookstagrammers, at olivias.bookclub. And Margaret is at Overbooked and Overdue. Make sure to rate and subscribe to this podcast and tell your friends. You can find us on Apple and Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, and Amazon Music.
Club, an Arizona's Family Originals podcast.